All right.
Right.
Good evening. Thank you so much for coming out for Boston Week. My name is Amanda Toomey, and I'm one of the organizers for the event. On my screen, you will see the sessions that are currently happening right now. And the one that you're in is What Now? Entrepreneurial Options for New College Grads. So if this is not where you're supposed to be, go ahead and navigate to the bottom of your screen, click on Change Track, and then click on one of your other track options and head over to our other session. But assuming you're going to be joining us today, I'm going to go ahead and move forward and let you know that, as a reminder, we love questions here. Please use the Q&A tab on the far right of your screen to submit questions throughout the session, and we'll get to them at the end. We also, if you haven't heard already, have an awesome social media competition floating around. So basically what you want to do is pay attention to your speakers today, see what they're saying, post an awesome quote on social media from them using the hashtag SBW2021, and then you'll be entered to win one of $500 gift cards to a Black-owned Boston business. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to your moderator, Glo Robinson.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Glo Robinson. I'll be moderating tonight's panel, What Now? Entrepreneurial Options for College Graduates. But I first would like to introduce our incredible panelists. We have Ilon Shalev. He is the founder and CEO of Elfie and a former MBA graduate of MIT, Sloan School of Management and Business. Then we have Megan Maloney. She's an MBA candidate at Harvard Business School and an early stage investor. And lastly, we have Basil Alamari, consultant at Bain & Company, Columbia Business School, MBA Venture Capital and Entrepreneurship. So thank you all so much for being here. It's an honor to interview all of you. And lastly, my name is Glo Robinson. I'm the CEO and founder of Go Off, and I'm a senior at Boston University. So to get us all started, my opening question for you all is, reflecting back on your experiences, what would you have chosen? Would you have chosen to work at a corporate company or a startup after graduation, and why? And as a current undergraduate, what should I be doing while getting my bachelor's of arts in a future or working for a future startup? Would anyone like to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. So a little bit of context. Right after undergrad, I worked for what was then an early stage startup called ZocDoc, and I found it to be incredibly valuable. I think you can go either route. At the end of the day, the two things that I would optimize for, were I to go back and do it again, it's just like meet as many smart people as you can and learn as many things as you can, and you can do that in both environments. But you know, as long as those things are the things that you're prioritizing and optimizing for, I think you can do it. I really enjoyed being in a startup. I went into a corporate role right after being at ZocDoc, and I'll say I liked it a lot less. And then now being at Bain, it almost feels like a startup within a big company, working on a very, very small team. So I've sort of seen it all, and I think they're all viable routes. You just have to know what'll work for you.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, Basil. I think, so I went the corporate route. Tech, when I was graduating, was just becoming a thing, but Google was still the startup in some ways. So it wasn't as common for people to go. What I would say is, corporate world, while it gets boring and hierarchical and all the things you might hear, it's actually really good for if you don't exactly know what you want to do, but you know you want to be around smart people doing really interesting things, because a large corporation can give you the opportunity to rotate through different roles. Whereas if you're in a startup, you might be context switching a lot in a role, but you might not necessarily know how it's done, like at the best of the best level. So if I could go back, I'd probably go into a quote unquote tech corporate role, like going to a Google or Facebook or maybe one of the big tech companies, as opposed to a bank. But I do think there's some merits to learning how it's done at the high level, and then, you know, going back down to a startup to iterate.
I'll jump in too. I'll say that for me, the answer is yes to both. And I think that the order could be beneficial to be, first, you go to somewhere where you feel confident that you can stay passionate about what you're doing. So it's either a corporate or a startup. as long as you're passionate and you're it's your sweet spot of what you want to do or feel comfortable doing. And then after, I guess, a year or two, switching to the other place, getting outside of your comfort zone, kind of polish the things that would give you a lot of value for focusing on. And so for me, it will be kind of a mixture of both, if possible, of course, if the opportunity presents itself.
Amazing answers. It inspired me to come up with this next question. So what motivated all of you guys to, the thing that you all have in common is the fact that you've all worked in a startup at some point. What motivated you to even make that first initial step in the first place?
I can jump back in. Go for it.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I can go for it. So I spent 12.5 years in the military, so kind of a non-traditional background, and I was so eager to start something fresh, and for me that was kind of the motivation to go for a startup, and basically getting outside my comfort zone. Was kind of alluded to it in the beginning. Yeah, that was my motivation.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'd left ZocDoc. I went to Salesforce. Enjoyed the work, enjoyed the people, but just didn't see myself there long term, and didn't think I was learning fast enough. And then went and joined a seed stage startup called Simon Data, and was there from seed to Series C. And I think the motivation beyond joining was that I had very little to lose. Right, like I had enough of a resume at that point that if things went horribly sideways, I could I'd be all right. And I think that was what I needed, as like a little bit of a safety net. And I think we all have different sort of appetites for risk. Like some people need no safety net and they're like, who cares, I'm going for it. And other people are like, let me get 10 years of work experience and save some money and so on. And I think I just happened to hit that sweet spot of where I was like, this is a level of risk that I'm comfortable with. I'm ready to go for it. And I think also just meeting the founding team and feeling like even if things were to go sideways, there's no way that I wouldn't learn something out of it. I really just enjoyed meeting them over the course of a month or two while sort of interviewing.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, my startup experience is much less than Aylan and Basel, but this past summer I was at Clubhouse. I've also worked at a mental health startup. It was twofold. Actually, on my resume it says I studied economics in undergrad, but I also studied music, and I always have felt this push and pull between sort of logic and maybe creativity. And a lot of the logic itch was scratched in the finance world, but I felt like the creative itch wasn't there for me. So I viewed startups as, in a lot of ways, being able to unleash creativity, because you never really know the answer. If people knew how to build the perfect startup, I think everyone would just do it. But a lot of times it's really, really, company dependent. And the second thing was that I think Basil, or maybe as Aylan had mentioned it earlier, there is something about your passions, and some people are able to meet those passions right away after school. But I think most of us kind of try different things in order to figure out how to marry passion and work. And for me, it really is this idea of working with creators so that they don't have to think about businesses, right? Like I come from the business side, but I really love the idea of people being able to do what they love without having to think about all of that. So Clubhouse was a really good way for me to marry those two passions, and then, be in a tech environment where you can be pretty creative.
Again, phenomenal answers. Or Aylan, did you want to say something? No. Okay. My next question is, you touched, Megan, upon passion. And so how has working in startups, or, maybe it's startups, or maybe we're going to talk about MBA, getting your MBA as well. How did that help, those experiences help you find what your passions are today? I know as an undergrad, it's always kind of daunting when you're walking around campus. You're like, what am I supposed to be doing here? What if I don't know what that passion is? And there's kind of like this push of like, okay, figure out what it is and graduate and get a job. And so even after graduating, you probably didn't necessarily know what that was. What about those experiences? Can we talk a little bit more about what helped you, what pushed you to kind of like find, yes, this was my calling? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think for me, the answer was actually not in school or even work necessarily. Like people always say this, but there's a quote that's whatever you do on the weekends is probably what you're meant to do in life. And I personally wound up spending a lot of my weekends, whether it was photography or music or just, like literally reading blogs on tech as well. I felt like, okay, I'm spending a lot of time doing this. Maybe I should find a way to incorporate this into my life because A, it makes it easier for me. I'm not, having to juggle two different lives. But B, it's also more fun. So if you just find yourself, for example, becoming re-energized by a meeting with a person, there's this idea of expanders, like in the mental health space, where you meet people and they show you something about yourself that you hadn't considered before. A lot of times you're just, as every conversation you have with someone, right? If I talk to you, Glo, and I find out you're a founder, I say, oh, what's a founder? Oh, don't I have to have capital to do that? Oh, I don't have to have capital? What's a venture capitalist firm, right? I didn't know what venture capital was growing up, and I didn't even know about it after undergrad. But I started talking to people and understanding that, oh, I could take this macroeconomic theory thing that I did and also take some of the creativity that I like to do in music and invest in people to empower them to become, or empower them to have their dreams come to life or the vision come to life that they've created. So it was a mix of paying attention to what you spend your time on and then also talking to people so that you can start to expand what you think is possible in life.
Basil, Eilon, do you guys have any thoughts as well?
No, I mean, I think Megan said it perfectly. I think you sort of need that regular, recurring, sort of like moments of introspection and be like, what am I doing? Is this the thing I want to be doing? Is this the thing I want to be spending my time on? What am I spending my time on? And I think that ends up leading you to your quote unquote passions, whatever they might be.
Yeah, I'll just you mentioned the term calling, and I think that's kind of exactly what happens when you found a company. For me, the passion was, okay, I got to find my calling. Like I did my job in the military, was even my career, but then I'm ready to take the next step and do something for that fulfills my kind of soul. And once you find that, and I think Megan, the concept about, hey, I'm focusing on the weekend, maybe that's what I should do, actually resonates a lot with me. And so and it goes back to the passion area. So once you find that, it's really hard to let go. And it happens to everybody in a different point in their career. Some people did it from day one. Some people need to kind of spend more time to kind of figure out for themselves what their passion is. But definitely the calling piece was a big motivator for me to kind of focus on the startup.
So now shifting a little bit, I think one of the biggest things, at least for younger people, is sort of when you do find that calling or do find that sense of change, it can be a very emotional experience because your identity is tied to it and you're changing. What was that like when you guys figured out what those passions were, and how did you decide to pursue them further? So was it getting your MBA? Was it quitting your job? Like, what was that emotional experience like for you, and what did you do in order to suffice your calling, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if for me, at least, it didn't feel like a single moment, and nor do I think it's like that moment is completely passed. Right? I think these things happen gradually, and I think there was a moment when I remember like heading to work in the morning, and my roommate being like, all right, have a great day at work, and I remember being like, yep, like I'm gonna have a fun day, like selling software, and I just was like, actually, I will probably enjoy it. Like this is kind of what I like. And I think in that moment, I also realized like it didn't actually matter what I was doing as long as I was working with people who I respected immensely, who I thought were super, super smart. Like we could be, and like we were leveling up whatever we were doing, right? So if we were making the next best universal TV remote and I was with like 5 of the smartest people I knew, I would have been just as happy. And so I think for me, that was my passion, right? It wasn't necessarily like a particular field. It was just try to make something better with smart people and spend your time doing it. And then it didn't actually matter how much time I spent. Like I enjoyed being around those people.
Yeah, I'll add to that part around sort of being around people that you feel like you're learning from and growing from. I feel like that is so, so important. And on top of that, it's really important to be insanely curious. I think sometimes people find a job and then get very comfortable. Anytime I personally get comfortable in a job, I'm like, I need to get out of here because I'm going to stagnate. It's not good, right? You get bored, you show up later, you don't learn as much. And I think sometimes even underlying the question, Glow, is okay, how do you find your passion? And as Basil just mentioned, it's actually a journey, right? There's no like end destination to I know exactly what I want to do, why I'm here, and every single day I dedicate my life to doing that. Maybe you'll meet some people who will say that, but I guarantee under the hood, there's going to be some moments of the day where they weren't doing that exact thing that they thought they were passionate about, but was actually very important to them as well. You can be just as passionate about keeping in touch with family as you can about, running your company and building the thing that you've dreamed of. So that's why I think like the point Basil's making around being around people that push your curiosity and help you learn is just as important as the quote unquote nailing your dream job or building a company piece.
Yeah, I'll refer to the second part of the topic about the coping with emotions. So for me, it would be I think it goes back to people. Like if you're surrounded with good co-founders, then it kind of helps navigate any emotional roller coaster. That's one thing. And the second thing is taking care of yourself, mental health wise. So if you have a routine that kind of helps you out, I personally like endurance sports. So when I was not doing my endurance sport in the name of more work, then I would find myself less likely to be mentally strong. And then when I actually went back and spent a little bit more time on myself, it helped me be more efficient business wise. And so these are kind of the two things that I would kind of recommend.
This is perfect. This is a perfect segue. So you all talked about it's the people that you're around that impact your experiences. So all of you have another thing in common where you went to go get your MBAs or are currently pursuing them. Did that have an impact on what the idea of being around these, the set of people, right, to enhance your learning, impact your decision to go back to get that MBA? Basically, the question is, what made you decide to go get your MBA?
So I have a maybe controversial answer to this topic, but maybe it's also because I'm still in school. So I actually feared that my MBA would prevent my learning and curiosity, or at least stagnate it, if I'm being really honest. And the reason I say that is because the perception is that if you're going to pursue an MBA, it's sort of a safety net. I came from the world of tech. Risk aversion does not work well in that world, right? Taking risk and being creative, all of the things I mentioned that I'm passionate about. So when I sat back and had thought about my MBA, I was like, what is it going to do for me? And the passions that we talked about. But the reason came down to a simple idea that a mentor said to me when I was considering it. And he said, look, Megan, you're on this treadmill, you're doing great in work and life, but I guarantee you do not know what you do not know. And that has continued to stick with me. I mean, it was even a couple of years ago that he said that. But what the MBA does for you is it makes you take a pause on that treadmill, especially if you're very career oriented. And B, it introduces you to people and countries and topics that you would not have at least for me, I would not have otherwise gotten exposure to, right? We had a very intense debate about whether China is actually becoming the next superpower, right? And like just as an example, the teacher was very, very against what a student from China thought about China. And in seeing that like juxtaposition between two different worldviews where people could have a debate respectfully is something that I still carry with me as I think about going back into boardroom situations or going back into this world of tech where you might disagree with someone on a very, very sensitive topic and be able to speak about it in a respectful way. So yeah, just to answer it, I did not go back for the curiosity piece, but I have been learning so much more than I thought I would, just by virtue of being around people who were not in my immediate orbit.
I feel like Megan hit the nail on the head. There's very little I would add to that other than like I was genuinely surprised by how much I would appreciate and value, and then like it's sort of silly saying it retrospectively now, but like how much I'd appreciate and value being in an environment with people having completely different worldviews. Like as much as I love going to a conference and talking about digital infrastructure with somebody, right, there's a whole level, like another level of value that you get from the kind of conversations Megan's describing.
It's very interesting. For me, and the reason I went to get my MBA was because I knew I wanted to start my own company, and all I had in my arsenal of experiences is non-traditional military stuff for like 12 and a half years, and when I told my immediate network that my plan is to be an entrepreneur and found a company, and that is why I'm going to get my MBA, everybody was laughing at me and said, if you want to start a company, just start a company. And that could not be so further from the truth. I think the MBA provided me with, and I'm so happy that I went through the process, because as an entrepreneur, I wouldn't say you need to be a jack of all trades. I would say you need to be an ace of all trades, because it's so complicated. There's so many things that could go wrong, and so if people get their MBAs to be a product manager or a consultant or a VC or whatever it is, an entrepreneur needs to have a lot of, like a breadth of skill. And so super happy that it happened. And I definitely think that if people want to be entrepreneurs, an MBA could, if you tailor your program very, very specifically towards your goals, could be very, very impactful.
Amazing answers. I'm in awe. What I really appreciated is just like the candor and the honesty. Like I don't think that was necessarily a controversial answer at all, Megan. I think it was a very honest answer, and I think it was a very, like, what's the word, refreshing answer, quite frankly. And I just wanted to say I personally really appreciated hearing that, because I think one of the things that especially college students feel who are working on other ventures or projects outside of their classes is, do we actually really appreciate the class time that we have? And it's like, I'm a senior now, and I'm made a rule where I'm like, I'm going to turn off my notifications, maybe even like take notes by hand, just so I'm like, all right, I'm paying all this money, might as well. Do you guys have any advice sort of, for undergrads in the sense of how we can maximize this opportunity of education that we might be kind of rolling our eyes about like, oh, why do I have to be here? I just want to like graduate now. You get what I'm saying? Any advice?
I think I didn't appreciate in undergrad my professors enough. Like I viewed the class as just like, here was some structured time, twice a week or whatever it was, to go learn this very specific thing. And like, for sure, like that's exactly what it was. But behind that class, or I guess in front of the class, is someone who has spent a tremendous amount of time of research, like has an incredible network, like so on. Like I wish I leaned on my undergrad professors in the same way that I ended up leaning on my MBA professors. Like they just know so much. Like even if you're working on a startup, even if you want to go work for a nonprofit, even if you're like in the middle of recruiting for consulting, like they're not going to add no value, right? Like lean on your professors and spend time with them. There's a reason they teach, and there's a reason they do research. Like they want to have those conversations. They want to help out students. I would just, like if I could go back, I'd probably spend 10% more time like paying attention in class, like 100% more time talking to my professors outside of class.
Man, this is such a good question, because I feel like if I could go back, I don't know if I would change anything, because I think younger Megan would not have listened to anything I'm about to say, but hopefully some of you do. And that is question everything. I think in undergrad, I started to get the muscle. So for the liberal arts type people, I'd gone to Columbia for undergrad, and you have to do this core curriculum. So we had to do everything from science-based classes to art humanities. And when I tell you I did not understand my art humanities class, I was like, why do we have to learn this stuff? I do not care who Rembrandt is. I do not care about chiaroscuro. You know, I was very, very tuned out in some of those higher level classes. I actually enjoyed the nitty gritty, the calculus, something where there was an exact answer. And what has been so interesting about this is A, the amount of time Rembrandt's even come up in conversations for me, but B, the questions or the ways in which you learn to debate in school show up very often in the workplace and probably in life, right? So what I would say is that when a teacher, for example, says something that you don't quite understand, don't be afraid to raise your hand and say, can we walk through this one more time? What I'm hearing you say is, etc. What you're doing in that moment is building muscle for yourself to be the person who's kind of standing up for other people, because I guarantee there's at least one or two other people who are just as confused as you are, if not the whole classroom. In undergrad, though, you get very timid and you wait till you get to the teacher fellow session, and then you can try to figure it out. And by the time you get to the exam, it's too late. So really, really do like ask questions and appreciate the liberal arts background as well, because it comes up so often for me, which I've been really, really surprised.
For me, optimizing undergrad would be implementing some sort of a personal OKR system. OKR stands for objectives and key results. So basically ask yourselves, okay, I'll ask myself, what is my objective for this year? I don't know, senior year. Maybe start my own company. Okay, how am I going to measure that objective I'm going to achieve? I don't know. I'm going to have 10 ideas per week or 10 ideas per whatever time frame. I'm going to work on one idea for a full month to see how it goes and whatever it is. And so implementing sort of an OKR kind of helps out, I think, optimizing decision making, because you got to juggle, right? You got to juggle life, friends, family, academia, extracurricular. Anyways, that's how I would go about it.
Island, can I add to that too? Because I feel like in undergrad, you have so much free time, more free time than you think. You can always overload your schedule. And I feel like one of the things I especially see undergrad students doing, say, I want to start a company, but I don't have an idea. I'm like, if you just thought of everything as a project as opposed to a company. So in the same way you might think of side hustles of buying sneakers online and you become really good at it, it might turn into a business for you down the line. And so what I would say is just like, think of everything as a project as opposed to a company. And like Ilan said, maybe you say, I'm going to do 10 projects a week. And it's just, most of them probably won't work. And maybe a month, whatever it is, maybe they won't work. It's fine. Just keep doing stuff just for the heck of it and for the fun of it.
I completely agree. I think one of the, perspectives that I've noticed is I think a lot of times, especially kids that want to start companies, I mean, I am one of them, we'll see how it goes, but I think more than anything, we all have this commonality of we really want to find purpose. And I think the issue in college is I think we kind of get really lost, as in like, what am I kind of doing here? And you're like, well, I think I like this. And then I think a lot of times starting a company or starting this really big project is kind of the calling of like, it's just the act of it, but then actually finding your real calling is this gradual process, as we discussed earlier. So I think the thing is, as we do graduate and move on to the real world, like what are any key lessons that really have translated? I kind of wanted to go back to that initial answer that you had, Megan, about key lessons that you had during your undergrad or even MBA experiences that have really stuck with you in terms of like maybe how you have either found your calling or, given you a shape of how to like go about your career, if that makes sense. Like any sort of key moments, like as in like speaking up or like the conversation about China. I thought that was a really interesting anecdote.
Yeah, I might have to think about this. So are you asking were there any key moments in undergrad that have informed how I think about my calling today, quote unquote?
Yes, a little bit. Yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it.
Yeah, Basil, Island, do you guys have anything? I have to think about this for a quick second.
I have an answer. Like, for sure, I remember studying economics for undergrad, and there was this class when we learned about utility functions where um, each individual values decisions that they make differently. It blew my mind. Like the fact that, I could buy sunglasses and it will give me 10 units of happiness, and my buddy will buy the same sunglasses and it will give him 2 units of happiness measured in a kind of an economics kind of way. Blew my mind that you can actually quantify thoughts and feelings and such. And I remember that I knew that I will try to do something that makes me happy. Like me, I have my own utility kind of function that I should solve for to be happy. And over time, I realized that starting my own thing and running my own company, creating my own culture with co-founders that I trust and spend time with, that kind of gives me the highest level of utility. So I definitely goes back to that point where I learned about utility function.
Okay, I think I got one because Island made me remember. So, like I mentioned, a lot of the things that sort of informed my life were the things I was doing on the weekend or after class or in my free time. And one of those, when I was in undergrad, was a financial literacy course that a friend of mine, he had started this nonprofit, and he said, hey, I want to take some of the brightest students who were in the surrounding Harlem area to come and learn about financial literacy topics. He was working at Goldman, which at the time was considered a very big bank, or it still is considered a big bank, I guess. And I was also starting to move into the banking world. And what had happened was obviously the mortgage crisis had occurred and disproportionately impacted underserved communities. So what was so fascinating about this was I needed to teach essentially what securitization was and how the crisis happened in the span of 45 minutes to high school students who might not have the biggest attention span. And I explained it to them. It's how I imagine teachers must feel all the time. And there's that aha moment in a class where students understand that by people, and there's a lot of layers to this, but people not knowing that not putting a down payment on a home was actually going to cause them to potentially get into this foreclosure situation. Because they didn't have the education around that, they had gotten disproportionately impacted by the crisis. And there was this aha moment in the classroom where all the students were like, I want to learn how to manage my own money. And after that lesson, all of the lessons, they paid attention. And we were even able to get to the point where we talked about financial aid. And apparently some of their guidance counselors had said that they wouldn't be able to go to an institution like Columbia because they didn't have enough money for it. And during the class, we walked through what does it mean to apply for need-based financial aid, et cetera. That was a really big moment for me. I don't know what happened to all of those students, and I haven't tracked it. But I felt like I wanted to have more of those aha moments around financial literacy and making sure that, in the same way that people helped me get there, I would be able to help others get there as well. And it's informed so much of what I do to this day, even with sort of nonprofit work that I do outside of school, et cetera. So it was a big moment for me.
I feel like my answer is going to be far less thoughtful. So I wish I'd gone before Megan. In terms of aha moment, I was working on a startup in like an e-com startup in undergrad. And there was a point where I felt incredibly overwhelmed by like, how do we like set this website out? Like, how do I like how do we source things? Like, how do I get a developer to like do anything for me when I have no money? And there was a point when I realized that like it was all about like storytelling. If I could get people really impassioned, if I could tell a really good story, I get someone maybe not to put 100% effort, but to like make an intro or like give me 10% of something or whatever it might be. And I think I like even in a corporate environment, even in like more established startup environments, I've realized like if I want to get an initiative off the ground, it doesn't matter if I've got this like spreadsheet that says ROI is going to be 10. Like no one cares. Like if you can't tell a really good story, so no, you're not going to be able to raise money. You're not going to be able to get like initiatives done internally. Yeah. So now even like when put together a PowerPoint, it's like, what is the story I'm trying to tell, or do these slides just look good? And so I guess that was sort of my aha moment.
Again, I'm having so much fun just listening. I could go all day with this. All right, shifting a little bit to another question, kind of touching on the idea of underserved areas. What we found is, I know this is a little bit of a segue, but I think it's an issue that should be brought up or discussed. And I know all of you definitely have opinions about this. For the last couple of years, especially in the startup space, or, there has been a lot more of a push to have diversity, right? And they've been claiming that, VCs have been investing in, minorities and underrepresented founders. And so while there's this great PR play and social media push, and the rates are slowly improving, it's still really low. What are your thoughts about this issue, and any tips or recommendations for minorities or underrepresented founders? Or just in the space in general? It doesn't have to be necessarily with VCs or venture capital, but it could just be in the recruitment space of getting into a competitive industry like tech or venture capital, private equity.
I don't think I realized previously like how much network mattered. And obviously there are a ton of sort of reasons why, the stats that you mentioned like are the case. But so many people like don't use traditional paths to get things done, whether it's like getting recruited into a big company, whether it's like raising money, whether it's, whatever it might be. Like they're leaning incredibly heavily on their networks, and those networks exist, right? Like you can't lean on a network that you don't have. And ultimately people invest in people that they've been introed to. People invest in people that they like, that they're their buddies, and so on. And to whatever extent you can have that, and it can be incredibly difficult if you come from a background that like either is like underrepresented or like a financial background that like doesn't come with a network of VCs. It can be really, really hard to do that, but like lean on those networks as aggressively as possible. And like I understand that in some ways that is like, hey, it's on the person who is disproportionately affected, and like that is obviously not what I'm trying to say. But to whatever extent a founder can do that, I think you just benefit immensely. And I think over time, like it's a bit of a flywheel. Like if investors start to look like community, like varying communities, like founders who come from those communities will get funded, and so on. Like it's hard to expect people who, I remember being in a VC environment, and we got pitched like a women's health startup, and I like looked around the room, and it was like a bunch of dudes in their 60s, and like how could I expect them to be like, yeah, that's a great idea, right? Like you just can't expect that environment to yield a result of like, we're going to cut a check now. And so I think the both sides of the table have to start to look a little bit different in order for there to be real progress.
Yeah, I feel like that's a very true point, Basil. You have to change the room itself. But I do think while the numbers have moved very slowly, I think 2018 is 100 or so startups were founded by Black and Latinx. And now we're at 300. Yay, like progress, right? And the number that have raised over $100 million, I think, is like 6. We can probably count the number of unicorns that are Black or Latinx founded on 2, maybe 3 hands now. And so there's so much, it reminds me of sort of like the conversation around banks and sort of like corporate America, where the pipeline gets strong, or there's people there, but then they never make it to the top. And a similar thing happens with women. I think the issue is we took the sort of Black and Latinx conversation in the same way that we took the women conversation. So a few years ago, what you saw were a bunch of venture capital firms during the Me Too movement and after started and led by women. But the issues, and I'm saying this as someone, at the intersection of both, the issues that women face are fundamentally different than the issues that Black and Latinx face, right? There's sort of structural things that we can talk about, generational things that we can talk about. But there's also, to Basil's point, a cultural piece that we have to talk about as well, which is, for example, in the Black community, between redlining and not being able to get mortgages. And I know my family has personally had land taken during the Reconstruction era. You fend for yourself. Why would you ask someone for something when most people tend to take from you? And so you got to where you are today, on your own volition. So what does it mean to ask for an extra $2 million, right? Like what you'll see sometimes with founders is they'll actually calculate exactly how much they need in order to get to a place where they're profitable, which I could argue is actually a good thing in a lot of ways. But other founders, they'll come in and say, I need $5 million. And you say, how did you get that? They're like, well, this person's got a term sheet, has already given me a term sheet. So that's my validation right there. Are you in or are you out? And so that sort of dynamic just creates a world where what I think Basil is saying is spot on, where you just need to change the narrative and make it such that it's embarrassing and also a huge missed opportunity if you only have all white men in a room. You miss out on the women's health market. You miss out on a company like City Block, which is doing primary care, mostly based in underserved communities. You miss out on, we're talking about the women's companies, right? Like there's so many. Bumble with Whitney. The more unicorns we have, the more the create a FOMO effect, and the more I think people will wake up to it. So I'm encouraged by it. And if you're a founder who identifies in one of these groups, capital has never been more abundant, and it's actually in your advantage, and interest to network, like Basil is saying, and get funded, because people are actually setting aside capital to fund you. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easier, and I feel like a lot of VCs give advice and not actual capital. So, but you should be going out and feel confident that you can raise, someone out there, including me, is looking to find people like you guys. So
I'll kind of dovetail something that Megan mentioned, kind of the last point about be confident. I think that in general, entrepreneurship, it's just a bunch of outliers. And so most companies fail, like if you look at the statistics. And so those who succeed, and obviously those who don't, but they all at a certain point in time believe in themselves. And so if you really believe in yourself and you have the grit to persevere, by all means, it will pan out over time if you can survive the hard times. I can't tell you how many times the world told me that what I'm want to do, I'm not supposed to do. I'll just give one example, which is quantifiable. I've taken 11 standardized tests to get into a position that I can apply for an MBA. 7 GMATs, 4 GREs, and 2 TOEFLs, like the English thing. And so theoretically, the system told me you're not supposed to do that. Like, you're not supposed to get an MBA. I was like, nope, the system is wrong. I should get an MBA. And so yes, I'm privileged to have had the resources to go through this 1.5-year process. And of course, what Basil mentioned about the network and everything. And so definitely there's some predispositions that could help, but all in all, believe in yourself. Grit will win in life.
I wanted to follow up on a point that you made, Ilon, and about outliers. And so my question is to all of you is, do you feel like the concept of entrepreneurship is more of a mindset, or is it just kind of like a thing of like, oh, I started a company and now I am an entrepreneur? I've always personally found it to be more of a mindset. I'd love for you guys to speak more on this issue.
I think it's a combination of mindset, but also profession. And it goes back to what I mentioned in the beginning. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, so I went to get my MBA. I think it is a very difficult profession with lots of skills that are important. And, mindset can take you up to a certain point. Skills can take you up to a certain point. Combination of both is kind of the combo that I think is on the table to be discussed.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say that I've observed around sort of the best founders I've seen, they tend to, like Aylan said, have both skill sets locked in, but they don't really call themselves entrepreneurs. I can't think of one person who has, and instead they always say they just like building. Like it's a thing that they enjoy. And so when I think about that, like the label is less important. It's more about the act of what you do and the skill sets, like Aylan is saying, that you were using in order to do that thing that you love. So for a lot of folks, it just seems to be that building is the one characteristic that's just very, very fun.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think there's probably people who view it in both ways distinctly and like have been successful. But in terms of like when I think to like my friends, like former colleagues and so on, who've like gone and built stuff, like they almost view it the way that Megan talked about projects before. But like that's just how they view everything, right? They're like, I don't know, I'm just working on this thing. I see a problem. I'm going to go build a solution. And like their acquisition of skills is project based rather than being like, for example, when you go get your undergraduate degree or MBA or whatever, you're like, I'm going to go get these skills. I'm going to time box it, and then I'm going to go do stuff. I think they view every skill learned as like, I want to go build this thing. Well, I've got to go figure out how to do some graphic design work, or I've got to figure out how to I've got to learn Python because I only know this other language, right? Whatever it might be. I think people who view their life as a series of projects, that's like the entrepreneur mentality. And like sometimes those projects hit, and sometimes they're just fun things that you do with your friends. And yeah.
Adding on to that, I think one of the things that you all brought up that was really important is solving a problem. I don't know. I'm just kind of curious personally, because I also am in the startup space. Is I feel like they don't emphasize this enough, or it's like, or especially at least in the way that I've been taught entrepreneurship. I mean, I think it is, but the idea of solving a problem or building something, right? And so I think the thing is, it's like when you go raise, it's you're trying to get more money to solve this problem or grow this problem. But I think the thing, I guess, kind of where I'm going, this is very much like an ad hoc question, is like, do you feel like we emphasize enough in the startup space the idea of solving a problem as opposed to just like, oh, we need to meet these metrics? Does that kind of make sense? What I'm getting at is like, I feel like sometimes we ignore the fact, what are we ultimately doing? Because there's all these other factors. Just kind of curious to hear your thoughts about this particular issue.
I think people de-emphasize problem solving the later the stage of the company. Like I remember when we were seed stage at Simon, like it was very clearly like we are solving a problem. And as we got to Series C, like we are a business now. Like we're solving business, like we are doing business things. And that's like sort of a silly way to say it, but like I think you start to be removed from the underlying problem solving. And then now working with sort of like larger customers and in the corporate environments, it very much doesn't feel like problem solving all the time. And I think it should be, right? So like, I'm not necessarily saying that you stop problem solving and then that's good. I'm saying that's the natural sort of organic path, but it's not good, right? Like the more often we can bring things back to problem solving, I think that the better it is.
Yeah, I'll say, I think what you're also talking about, in addition to what Basil just mentioned, is the sort of confusion among founders who are trying to raise capital and a bunch of investors are telling them, I need to see these metrics. and you're talking about, I'm trying to solve a problem, I'm not trying to show you metrics, right? So one of the ways to avoid that tension is to first understand that you know much more than the investor will ever know. So you can entertain the conversation and politely nod at whatever bits of advice that you want to take, but never ever let an investor build your company or sort of tell you what the exact solution should be, because you are the one that's in it day to day. And I guarantee you were the one that's been dreaming, breathing, sleeping, thinking about this problem. So sometimes I find that founders will I'm saying this as an investor myself, like over rely on the investor being the customer, and that's not who your customer is. It's the clients, the people who you should be talking to problem solve. The second thing you should know is that there's no formula. So each answer that you get from an investor is going to be biased. Yes, there are certain things like revenue milestones that might happen at Series A, but I've also seen pre-product companies raise a lot of money at Series A because it starts to take into background the exact problem, how much white space is there, all of these things. So really think about, Glo, like, what problem am I solving? To Basil's point, can I tell the story succinctly such that not only would people want to invest, but people would want to work for me and at this company because they believe it so much? And when that starts to happen, the metrics and stuff like that become sort of markers for investors, but they don't become the driving force. Like any investors just only looking for a marker, a KPI, I think personally doesn't, especially at the earliest stages, doesn't really get it. There's so many other non-tangible things, like I just mentioned, that you can solve for that doesn't fit a certain formula.
I'm very triggered from both the question and the answer and the answers. Here's my spiel. As founders, we sell three things. We sell company stock to investors. We sell careers, jobs, calling to talent, and we sell a product to a client or service, product or service. And so these are three different things. And I'm just not even a seed stage startup, right? We're closing our seed soon, so almost seed stage startup, but been at it for 3 years. From my experience, it seems like, yes, with investors, the problem is not that important. Unfortunately, we are problem solvers, but it's more about the metrics. Like what's the traction? What's the traction? Don't tell me about the problem. I understand there's a problem in the mortgage space, right? There's a problem in the mortgage space, of course. With the client, it's definitely the problem, but also the numbers, the metrics. Okay, so you're solving the problem, but what are the KPIs? Is this gonna increase my top line? Is it gonna decrease my bottom line? And so definitely a combination. And for employees, so far, it seems like just a problem. Like what problem are we solving? And so I think that going back to Basil's point about storytelling, I think the story is going to be different because you're selling three different things. So three different stories. Yeah, I hope I answered the question.
It was great. No, this was awesome. I was like personally taking notes during this one. I was like, gotta write this all down. I guess my closing, I think we have about 5 or 6 minutes left. I have one quick question for Basil specifically, and then I have a closing question for the group. Basil, you work in the consulting industry, and I recently went to a consulting conference for the first time and learned kind of like how the industry works. And I realized I was like, wow, there's so many tie-overs between working at a startup and solving people's problems, like from an objective perspective. Any sort of like relations or ties that you're like, how it is kind of similar working in a startup environment versus any differences that you'd like to share, compare and contrast?
Yeah, I think the big one is just like this idea of 80-20, right? Like you're never going to be able to know the full answer, whether it's for your client or for you as a founder at a startup or an early stage employee. Like you just have to build enough internal confidence to be like, I only know 20% about whatever I've got to go do, or like I only feel like we only know 20% of the answer. But I think it's the meaningful 20%. And so I'm going to go roll the dice and then we're going to move forward, because I think in some environments, like you have to know, like I can imagine in a big financial services environment, like if you don't have 100%, like that's not good, right? Like if you're moving around hundreds of millions of dollars, like maybe some amount of like confidence is probably important. But I think in a consulting environment, and then and in a startup environment, you just have to be like, I'm never going to know this. Like I'm never going to do enough like customer interviews to know if this is actually true. Like I mean, I'm sure for you, Glo, like you go out and do customer interviews. Like I'm sure like you don't have N of 1,000, right? Like you didn't go talk to 1,000 people. It's just you'd be too busy doing that and not building. And so like you have to go talk to 50 people and be like, that's all I've got, and I'm going to go do it. And I think that's the case in consulting as well. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And so I think, you know, we've got about 5 minutes left or 4 minutes left. My closing question is like anything, you know, the audience should take away, or like as, you know, a young grad or, you know, just entering the world, any last pieces of advice or like something you wish you could tell yourself? I know we kind of covered certain things, but just to kind of like wrap up today's session. I know it's pretty open-ended. It can be anything.
Yeah, I will say, I know this panel is on entrepreneurship a little bit, as well as just options. Whatever you decide right now, don't think of it as the end all be all. You know, it's okay. You go corporate, if you start a company, if you know, even decide to take some time off, it's okay. Like, I think a lot of times, especially as you got into college, you got in this thing, you feel like there should be something next that's decisive. I tell you, like, I'm still figuring it out 10 years later, so it's okay. The second thing I'll say is that if you are a founder or you are starting a company, you have an amazing amount of resources right now at your disposal, including a lot of sort of like free capital, like a lot of grants, as well as just what I would consider to be pretty low equity. And I'm guessing how, as Elon goes through his seed round, he can tell you that money becomes more expensive over time. So take advantage of that. Really go to your school, ask around, talk to other friends who are building cool projects, and see if you can even hop on. It's okay to take that risk. You know, congratulations for getting this far, but I think it could be just fun to try something new as well.
Megan sort of stole mine. I was just going to say that like your career is very, very long. I feel like I'm at the absolute beginning of my career. And if you'd asked me when I graduated undergrad at like 22, I'm like, where are you? I'm like, I've got to figure it out in the next couple of years. That's where I am. And now I'm like, no, I can figure it out whenever. Like as long as I'm continuing to learn, I feel very, very happy and fulfilled. And yeah, like don't stress about it.
Say that and not only money is more expensive as time goes by, but also time is more expensive, and your alternative options. And so, if you ask yourself, when do I want to start a company? In theory, it'll be more expensive later than now. But there's also a threshold of skills that I think one should accumulate before starting a company. The Zuckerbergs of the world are an outlier. There's actually an MIT Sloan article about it. So later, it's more expensive. That's kind of my my takeaway.
All right. Well, I think this pretty much we're right about time, I believe. So I just wanted to say thank you to all three of you for an incredible session. I felt like I learned a lot personally. I hope the audience did as well. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their night. Thank you so much for this incredible panel.
Thanks, Glo, for moderating.
No problem.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Take care. Have a good rest of your night, guys.
Thank you all.